What attracted me to Marseille was that it is a place of immigrants. So one of the things I was trying to capture was the melange of different peoples, this sort of contrast of traditional and modern. And it literally is the United Nations. Marseille is the oldest city in France, and what attracted me to Marseille was that it is also a place of immigrants. For millennia, people have been coming from other places, and so not just Muslims, many other peoples. And so one of the things I was trying to capture was that sense of sort of the melange of different peoples. But it is France. Make no mistake about it. And there is that energy and there is that style in France. And it is also Europe. It is not the Arab world and it is not the Muslim world. I don't think you'd see something like this there. Out of nearly 1 million people, there are over 200,000 Muslims in Marseille. And it's not a monolithic community. There are Muslims from North Africa and also from Sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the, in 2005, when many of the French cities erupted in riots, mostly out of the sort of poor Muslim and immigrant neighborhoods, Marseille remained tranquil. And that was also one of the reasons I wanted to go to this city, and I wanted to look at this issue of immigration, not just Muslim immigration in Europe, but immigration in general. And one of the reasons that it's successful, I believe, is this sort of integration. So in this picture, you've got a groom from the Comoran Islands, and you have a bride from Algeria, both Muslims. And this is a group of Comoran women. By the way, this is the largest population of Comorans outside of the islands, the Comoro Islands. I think there's about 40,000 Comorans just in Marseille alone. And I had never been exposed to these folks. And, I would say, I'm used to dealing with some pretty harsh communities and environments. And these folks were so gentle and so graceful and also quite welcoming of the camera, which I can't say was always the case in Marseille. This lovely man, this imam with his daughters the day before Eid. And this is during Eid. So because we're in France and France is a secular state, during Eid, which is probably the holiest day of the Islamic year, and it's the end of Ramadan, thousands of people were funneled into this basically into a convention center. One of the things that the fathers of Marseille are trying to do is to maintain this kind of control. And it's a very interesting balance where you're in an avowedly secular society, yet you have these huge immigrant populations that tend to be more traditional and also are looking to maintain their culture. And so there's this interesting mix. This was during Eid at the sort of a Muslim community center in the city center. And that's another reason why it's successful in Marseille, is that in the city center, you literally feel like you're in Algiers or Tunis, that the immigrant communities are not just banished to the suburbs and the poor neighborhoods surrounding the city. They actually inhabit the city center. And from all the people that we interviewed and from what I read, that really is one of the reasons that Marseille did not explode in riots in 2005, because the immigrants feel a stake in the community. This is during Eid al-Adha. This is 40 days after the end of Ramadan, and it's sort of this feast. It's a 2-day killing spree is what it is, quite frankly. I've photographed it in many different Muslim countries, and what was different about this is that I think literally 5,000 animals were killed over a 2-day period. And it's actually a beautiful ritual in that the idea is that you would slaughter an animal and then you'd provide the meat for your family, and then you would give the extra meat to the poor and less, and the disadvantaged in your community. But again, because we're in France, they do not allow people to kill the animals in their homes, in their backyards, in parks, in the public sphere, which is what would be more typical in a place like Pakistan or in Muslim countries. And so they would bring their animals to these slaughterhouses, and it was sort of this mechanized killing. What was interesting though, like in this scene, is that there were some men who wanted to still kill their own animals. They still wanted to hold on to that tradition. During the Arab Spring last year, I was there, and there were many immigrants from Tunisia who were coming, and they had no place to live and they had no food, so the community came out to give them food and shelter. Marseille also has an extremely large Jewish community, and they've been there for hundreds of years. I think there's 70,000 Jews in Marseille alone. I believe it's the third largest population in all of Europe. And it was interesting. One thing I wanted to tell you was that one of the reasons this became so hard is, with all my years of experience, I made a huge tactical mistake when I began this project. I thought I needed someone who spoke Arabic. Obviously, I needed someone who spoke French, because I don't speak French, and English. And I thought I'd need someone who'd speak Arabic. And I ended up hiring this Tunisian man who was a pretty hardcore, like, leftist socialist dude. And he essentially looked at me in National Geographic like we were McDonald's, and that I was actually part of the sort of neo-colonial conspiracy of America to take over the world. And his English was not very good either. So, you can always learn. But so I bring it up now because, my family is from Iraq. My family's Jewish, but my family is from Baghdad. So this Tunisian guy and this Iraqi guy show up at the main synagogue, and we wondered why the armed guards turned us away, So after my first trip, and this is classic me, I continued to work with him when I returned 2 months later, and it lasted 2 days, and we had this terrible fight, throwing things and yelling in the car, and he looked at me and he said, "I think we need a divorce." And he was right. And then it was magical, because what happened was, thankfully, he had introduced me to this lovely young French woman, 36-year-old single mom, speaks great English, name's Valerie. And it was my fortunes just turned around. And what was becoming this very dark, depressing, and a story where I thought, is this going to be my first time where I actually fail on a geographic assignment? Everything turned around. And just my mood, the pictures, and it really taught me a lesson about how important it is. I mean, again, you'd think I would know this by now, but how important it is that your liaison, your representative, is someone who represents you in a good way. And then subsequently, we went to when I revisited some subjects, Valerie would say to me, "Yeah, they were just telling me that when the first time you came with Omea, that he was telling them how much he didn't like you and what a bad guy you were." And I'm thinking, so no wonder it was such a struggle. There's also a very large Roma community, or gypsies as we sometimes think of them, and they're mostly coming from Romania. What was interesting about this community, though, and it sort of goes against the stereotype of the Roma, is that many of the people we met and interviewed, like this family, they wanted stable housing, they wanted to send their kids to school, they wanted to take advantage of the great healthcare system in France. They wanted to pay rent, they wanted a stable life. And I thought it's always interesting as a journalist and a reporter when you learn things that fly against the grain of what you normally see in the media. And I'm always, especially at this point in my career, I'm always trying to avoid, repeating stereotypes and cliches. I'm always looking for sort of new ways of telling stories. But there are still Roma in Marseille who are there, do what we typically think of, which is beg on the streets. You don't see this in this picture, but what was interesting is that many of the women would dress as Muslims and beg because they figured they would be more likely to get donations. Marseille is also the seat of the National Front, almost would you consider like the neo-Nazi party. That's maybe a little too harsh, but the National Front, Marine Le Pen, very right-wing, very anti-immigrant. So that's also fascinating that in a city that maybe of all of Europe represents immigrants, it is also the seat of the National Front in France. And this was at the opening. These are members of the National Front showing up at the opening of a movie that was sort of a pro-Algerian movie. So you have this very interesting mix in this city, but somehow it all sort of moves along peacefully. Marseille is a city of small communities and neighborhoods. And this is in the Noailles district. Again, this is one of the central districts of the city, which is predominantly Algerian, Moroccan, Tunisian. And this is pétanque, which is I think it was like a religion, but it's sort of a national sport, or at least it's a sport of Marseille. And I love this as an American. So it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You can't see this, but off to the side, this couple, their baby is in the stroller sleeping. So they're drinking beer, smoking cigarettes, playing this game at 4 in the afternoon. And I was just thinking, I said to Valerie, I said, we would never do this in America. And it's a shame, no. Because they were totally chill and happy. And so was the kid. There's also this, big youth culture there, and which is, in a sense, universal. This made me feel like I was back in San Francisco. This is in the city center by this famous old carousel. And this young woman is 32 years old, Algerian descent, a Muslim woman, but she works at a bank. She's totally Western and middle class, and she was out with her mates basically partying in the streets, all dressed up in funny costumes because she was getting married 2 weeks later. And then there are certain places in the city that are kind of a leveling ground, where when you go there, you're not, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, you're not, Algerian or French or Italian or Corsican. There's a very big Corsican population there too. And that is at the Olympic Marseille Stadium. And they absolutely express how they feel. I went to 3 matches, and seriously, at every one, by the end of it, the players had to leave, and the refs in particular had to leave with armed escorts because the crowd was so angry. But this is a place where all the different communities of the city come together, and this truly is a religion. Like so much of Europe and the world, football is a religion. The beach is another place, and there are many different beaches in Marseille, and there's some very urban beaches, and then there's sort of long white sandy beaches. These were a bunch of Maghrebi guys. Actually, I think one of them's an Egyptian as well, and they were getting all ready to sort of make the moves on some women. There's a group of high school students who had come to the beach for the day, and it literally is the United Nations. I mean, you have Asia, Africa, there's an Italian, a Spaniard, Algerian. It's really quite amazing, and it's beautiful to see a scene like this. And this sort of contrast of sort of traditional and modern. This is one of the more urban beaches. People would say to me, Marseille, wow, south of France, it must have been great. And all I could say was, no, it was actually horrible. And because people, I don't know if this is prevalent in all of France, because I have to tell you, I don't work very much in Europe. I mostly work in the developing world. And so I was actually really surprised at the level of negativity towards my camera. Also, Marseille is the largest port in France, and there used to be over 7,000 port workers. Now there are under 700 because of mechanization and also sort of the slumping world economy. This was at a rally. The French love to protest. This was at a protest against the raising of the retirement age. There's also this sort of nightlife, sort of dark and seedy side of Marseille. I was convinced that half the men on the streets of Marseille were hitmen. You have the Corsican mafia, you have the Italian mafia, you have the French mafia, then you've got the Maghrebian mafia, you know, the Algerians, Moroccans, and Tunisians, and then you have the Islamicists, but I probably wouldn't have known about them because they don't want to be seen. But you know, it was baffling to me. Again, as I said, I thought this was going to be a piece of cake. But the allure of this city to immigrants continues. This is a Tunisian man who was just arriving in the central train station. He had just arrived to come and visit relatives there. So that's Marseille. Thank you.